Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, helping to understand your customer, looking at trends, and some pretty amazing insights about the future and how to align your business to it. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
If you want more information about Spark Partners, please go to our website at sparkpartners.com. On today's podcast, we want to talk a little bit about the changes happening in the transportation industry across the board. And this was a bit of an eye-opening experience in some of the research we were doing for this podcast. But it occurred to me as I was driving from Tucson to Phoenix that the number of semis, big trucks on the road, is going to be severely affected by, it's going to be the change in logistics and transportation across the board is going to be affected by, of course, trends. So I actually did a little bit of research, and there are over 3 million truck drivers on the road, actually a little bit less than 3.5 million truck drivers. Thought it was 1 million, but it's a lot more than that. So that means that with the automation and the creation of this brand new landscape, taking the drivers out of the driver's seat and putting in autonomous hardware and software, it's going to have a significant effect on the sector as it pertains to the drivers. So what should these drivers and these owner-operators be looking at in the next 10, 15, 20 years, Adam?
Well, there's going to be a significant change. And I think people are underestimating how quickly it's going to happen. Most of the people in this country have ridden in an autonomous vehicle. They just didn't think about it. And that would be the subway systems. There was a time going back, 40 years ago when subway systems had engineers. There had people in the front of the subway string of cars, operating the cars, operating the brake, that kind of thing. In fact, there was a famous movie made about 40 years ago called The Taking of Pelham 123, about a guy who takes over a subway train. Well, that's all gone now. I mean, the last time I heard about it, I know Chicago had a subway driver who fell asleep and drove the subway right into the O'Hare Airport, creating a lot of damage. The net of it is that we've learned over time that the person operating a subway train was far more dangerous than if you let the subway train be run autonomously. That having proper instrumentation, proper feedback systems, proper electronics, the subway could operate much better without human intervention. So most of us have already had that experience. So when we start saying, well, I don't want to give up control of my car, it may sound odd now, but that's the way we thought about subway trains 50 years ago, that you needed a person there to operate them. And what we're learning is now we have the sensors and the capabilities that we don't need to have people operating these vehicles. I used to like to joke and say, I can't wait for there to be when I get on an airplane and there's no pilot on the plane, because every time you see a report about why a plane crashes, it's always attributed to pilot error. So if you get rid of the pilot, we get rid of the air, we'll probably have fewer airplane crashes, right?
Well, what's interesting is that there was an article, there's a Tucson company, actually they're based in California, but they have an operation in Tucson, called Too Simple. And they have created an autonomous big rig, basically. They're taking a big semi-truck, the tractor part, and they put all kinds of instrumentation on it, LiDAR and radar and a bunch of other things. And they drove it from Arizona to Oklahoma, which is kind of interesting because that's kind of where your roots are. So it was a 10-hour run. It was a 950-mile run, and they did it in 10 hours less than a human-driven route would take. And so that should really start to open people's eyes in what's going to happen in this industry. And like you said, people are uncomfortable with it, but it's going to happen very, very quickly. And for most people, they're not going to really see it happen until they start looking at who's driving the semi-truck when they're driving down the freeway. But for the industry people themselves, for the drivers and that whole industry, it's going to have a huge impact.
I mean, it's going to have a big impact on drivers. It's going to have a big impact on companies. Because if you start thinking about the process of moving freight, which is what these big rigs are doing, right? That's this complicated process where you have all sorts of intermediaries. So you're out there, you've got something you need to ship, you've got the shipping companies, you've got the drivers, you've got the truck transporters, you've got the last mile situation of getting it out of the city or getting it into the city, getting it into the lots. There's just a lot of hands that get involved in moving something from A to B. And if you think about it, you could reduce the number of hands substantially, simplify the process once you go to this autonomous approach. You also could greatly improve reliability, because today somebody's going to get in take this freight that you have, and it's going to go through all these different stations. But as each human touches it, there's an opportunity for human error. So did the freight get left on the dock? Did the freight go into a truck that got delayed for some reason or another? If you take that human element out and you start saying, now we can automate how we move that freight and we can track that freight, now we start saying, I know consistently I can put this freight on the truck in Tucson, and I know when it's going to get to Oklahoma City or Tulsa. It's not a matter of what the driver does and whether the driver gets sick and has to pull over, or the driver gets tired and has to pull over, or if the driver speeds and gets pulled over. There's all these things that are the potentials that could go wrong, and you're just guesstimating. But if you go to a system that's autonomous, where now you have much more control over the vehicle itself, then you can create much higher level of reliability. It's like we used to say, when I was living in Chicago, somebody'd say, well, I got to go downtown when I land at O'Hare, what should I do? And I'd say, well, you can take a cab, and that may take you anywhere from 35 minutes to 90 minutes. All depends on traffic and what's going on. Or you can pay $2 and you can get into the subway right there at O'Hare, and you're guaranteed assured of being in downtown Chicago in 40 minutes, right? Now, there's that trade-off. So do you really want to sit in a cab or an Uber or a Lyft, sit there and guess as to when you're going to arrive based upon factors around you, or do you want to have consistency? If you're in the business world and you are moving freight, consistency is much more valuable. To know that it's going to take, as you said, 10 hours or 12 hours to get from A to B with the load is much more valuable than saying, if I had all humans doing this, it might get there in 9, but it might take 15. And then when I have to schedule it for the truck where it's going to hit the door, right? Because we don't let trucks just randomly show up. They have to be scheduled into the dock. Then we'd have that all again, scheduled, set up, know which one's going to happen, which lot is going to arrive at what time. So it greatly improved the reliability of the docking and loading and the unloading process, and getting the right stuff in the dock at the right time. And the problem is that a lot of people just think of it as being somewhere in the future, some sort of Jetsons kind of a thing, and they don't realize that just we are that close to it right now. And I always say, why couldn't you just take right today? Why couldn't they take a section of road? I don't know, maybe they do it in Arizona or New Mexico or Kansas, and they could say, you're not allowed to drive on this section of the interstate. You must use an autonomous system. That way, everybody on that road is autonomous. That way, you don't have people driving recklessly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? We could start those tests.
There's
today.
Another piece of information.
There would be nothing that would stop us from doing it.
Another piece of information that I saw
I pulled up
something that is in the industry that's called, which is interesting because we talk about mobility as one of the top 4 major trends. It's called MaaS, Mobility as a Service, has grown 250% over the past 5 years. So what is mobility as a service? Mobility as a service is get this freight from here to there. Doesn't matter what mode you use, just get it from here to there by this time. And so now they don't care if it's by train, by truck, by UPS truck, by a flatbed, by whatever. As long as you get it from A to B, I'm willing to pay for this amount. And so that is a significant abstraction from how it's been, where you've sort of already earmarked, okay, this is going to go from here to there, it's going to get loaded into a train, it's going to go from Tucson to Tulsa, and then it's going to get unloaded, put onto a semi-truck, and then blah, 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 all that. And so you've had to plan that before, but now there's companies out there that'll take care of that all for you for whatever the price is going to be that will encompass everything.
In the last week, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA, released its statistics on accidents and deaths on the roadways. They compared 2019 to 2020. With the pandemic, a lot more people stayed home. Commuting went down. People weren't going on trips. They weren't driving to see families. The assumption that they had going in was that we would see fewer accidents and we would see fewer fatalities. Unfortunately, we did not. Despite the less traffic that was happening and the less congestion, people continued to drive the way people drive, and the casualties continued to be what they were. So that's just an indicator that the weakest link in this whole system is the driver. Drivers that have the ability to make decisions, bad decisions, while they're operating a vehicle. So I think what we're going to see is, insurance companies are going to get on top of this, I think, pretty quickly. They're going to start saying, if you want to drive, you're going to have to pay a lot more. If you're going to let the car drive itself, then, we're going to be a lot more, your rates will be different, because we can have faith that the car will keep itself out of an accident, whereas we don't have faith that you as a driver will keep yourself out of an accident. But then again, I come back to the same issue. Let's say that you are in Tucson and you want to go meet somebody for dinner. You're going to have to drive. If you're with an autonomous vehicle, you would say, you put in the location you want to go, and the vehicle would say, we will be there in 37 minutes. Sit down and relax. You now know what's going to happen, because the vehicle is going to drive on a route that it's developed, and it knows the traffic patterns on that route. So which is better, for you to drive and try to beat the traffic and cut the lights and steer around some cars and maybe try to take a side street to try to get there in 31 minutes? Or is it better to say, it's 37 minutes, sit down, relax, and let's wait until we get there, right? So I think we're going to have a lot of forces that are happening here. And then take another one, demographics. What we now have is a very significantly aging population, both in the United States and around the world. As people get older, their reflexes are slower, and let's be honest, they don't drive as clearly as they once did. Additionally, they can't see as good, right? So poor vision gets in the way. But our egos, as we get older, we don't want to give up our driver's license. We don't want to say, I can't operate that car. Ego gets in the way, even if our eyesight's failing and our reflexes are weak. But now if you think about that, you say, well, why not have an autonomous car? Now I have all the freedom and flexibility that I wanted from a vehicle, and I don't have to deal with the problems of my infirmities from aging. So the trend of demographics plays into this desire to have autonomous vehicles. Right. I was thinking about this. I believe that what we should be doing as business people is planning for this to happen, right? It's not a if it will happen, it's a when it will happen. And then on the when side, starting to say, it's probably going to happen an awful lot quicker than we thought. Like you said, we have people doing tests today. We need to keep track of these tests. If you're in the, how many freight tests are happening, how many user tests are happening. We're seeing increasingly that whenever there's a problem with one of these autonomous vehicles, such as a recent accident that happened in Texas, it turned out that the person operating the Tesla car was the cause of the car's failure. That he was not in the driver's seat where he was supposed to be. The car misunderstood what it was doing, and the accident happened because of the interference he made in not setting the operation up effectively. It wasn't the car that went bad. So I think what we have to start saying here is this is all very likely to happen. It's likely to happen much quicker, and it's going to get a lot of support from the insurance industry, and it's supported by demographics. So we need to plan for that in our business. But here's another way to think about this, and that's to think, how can I actually leverage this in the benefit of my business? So let me ask you, do you remember the name Radio Flyer? And when I say Radio Flyer, what does it conjure up for you? See? Exactly. So for, 100 years, Radio Flyer out of suburban Chicago has been making these little red wagons, right? And they've made the little scooters. Remember the little scooter you'd get where you put one foot on the board and use one other foot to give it a push and you would roll down the street? Well, that's kind of been their business. They've made some carts. They've focused on children, though, and how children would use these products. Well, Radio Flyer woke up. They looked at the demographics. The birth rates are way down, and they're not going to come back anytime soon. We know the only way we're going to keep the population numbers right in America is we're going to have to increase immigration. It's not going to come from a whole lot of babies being born. So now we have fewer children in the population. The core market for Radio Flyer is getting smaller. They announced recently they have now brought out an e-bike and an e-scooter. These are targeted at adults. So now an adult who needs to get around in the city can use an e-scooter. I don't know, you might be familiar that some cities have started these rental programs with e-scooters in them. This would allow you to have your own e-scooter to get around. And then the e-bike, it's great. I'll admit, I own an electric bike. I own one because when I want to go for a bicycle ride, my biggest fear was I'd go for a ride and not make it home. I'd get tired. That's the fear number one. Fear number two, the big hills. Do I have it in me to make it up the big hills whenever I get to them? The beauty of an electric bike is it's consistent. Here I've got 5 power bands and I've got 7 gears. And as I'm riding my bicycle along, if I'm going up a hill and I feel like it's getting too much, I can increase the power, or I can match it all up, go uphill. I can match it up to get me home. So my battery assist on my electric bike puts the fun back in bicycling for me, and makes it also something that I'll use to go to the grocery store or the post office, or when I want to go run a simple errand where I don't have to carry a whole lot of stuff, then I'll take the electric bike. So the demographic shift makes the electric bike better, and then here we see Radio Flyer say, wait a minute, why don't we take advantage of that? Why don't we take advantage of this aging population?
I have an interesting
in order to bring
thought
out a
here.
product
So
that's probably going to fit with them.
for those people that are listening and watching here, just think about someone back in 1910, right? So the Model T came out in 1908, and so I'm using kind of maybe a couple of years in. Here's a person that might own a wagon company, and they see this going on. They see this new strange creation, this horseless carriage running around, and they can make a decision whether or not to just continue on business as usual, making wagons, or should they consider what's happening in this new industry called the automobile, which had been around for 20, 30 years, but the Model T really made it accessible. And so here we are, 115 years later, give or take, and we're in a similar predicament. We have this new market emerging of autonomous vehicles. We have this new market of self-driving cars and all that. And so here we are. Are we going to invest in a new fleet of the old school driver semis, big rigs, or are we going to wait a little bit and instead invest in what's happening in the future, what's happening now? It's not even in the future; it's happening now. And so that's the sort of the juxtaposition I want to put out there as a something to reflect on.
And I think, again, it gets back to taking a look at trends and interpreting those trends for your business, and not waiting, but actually moving forward. So you mentioned 1910 and bicycles. There was a company that made that was a leader in bicycles, but they became the leader in motorcycles when they learned how to put an engine in the bicycle. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I would say Harley Davidson.
Absolutely correct. And so Harley Davidson became the motorcycle company in North America. They were by far the largest. They're still the largest in what are called the big bikes. It's 1,000 cc's or larger. But they've had a serious problem. First of all, their vehicles are very expensive, right? The Japanese motorcycles can be bought for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000. To get a Harley Davidson starts at 20 and goes up. You can spend $40,000 on one. And because they're so expensive, the only people who can really afford them oftentimes are older people. And so the demographic of the Harley riders has gotten quite old. The average buyer of a brand new Harley Davidson is almost 60 years old these days. I always say they buy it, they ride it for 1 year, they have a near miss, they put it in the garage, and it sits there until they die, and the grandson gets it and sells it. So the market for Harley Davidson has been terrible. They've just been off trend for a really, really long time. But guess what? This year, they launched an e-bike. It's called the Serial 1. That's expensive, whereas you can go buy the Radio Flyer bicycle for $1,700. The Serial 1 from Harley is $1,000. But look here, what we're doing again. We're appealing to the demographic. Now we can take those people out there who are in their 20s, 30s, perhaps they want to go, or even 40s, would want to ride a bicycle, like I said, to run errands, possibly even to go to work. And they'd say, well, do you want to ride a traditional bicycle with the, perhaps you get sweaty going to work and these things, or would you like to have an alternative? So the car is an option, but if they say, well, I could beat the traffic, I could beat these other problems with a bicycle, we now offer them a $5,000 Harley Davidson Serial 1 that'll do up to 28 miles per hour and easily cover the distance that they want. So once again, what I like about that story is a company that's really, in a marketplace that's doing terrible. The large engine cruiser motorcycle business is not growing. The demographic is dying on them. And here they take a look at the demographics and say, why couldn't we come out with a product that would appeal to the marketplace? So now we start saying, what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at a future where we're going to have autonomous subways, we're going to have autonomous cars, they're all going to be electric, and bicycles are going to be electrified so that people can have a traditional bicycle or an electric bicycle. And think about how much different the transportation market is at that point than it is today. And all of that technology exists. It is all there. People are using it. People continue to test it and take it forward. And so are you incorporating that into your
What's
plan?
interesting is that we've discussed this before in other podcasts, that one of the killers of business, believe it or not, is a nasty little word called nostalgia. We don't want to change the business model because we're going to upset the base. If you think about, here I am, the CEO, the chairman of the board of Harley Davidson, 3 years ago, before this decision was probably made, saying, all right, should we go in this new direction, which might possibly alienate a lot of our current base? Or should we say, you know what, in order to survive as a company, we've got to make this decision and go in this new direction? And obviously they made the right decision. And they probably did upset some people. But at the end of the day, what's more important, to upset your base that's aging, like you said, you sort of painted that picture, or is it more important to strike out in a new direction where you have an actual future, where you're still going to be viable and a company that is worth investing and buying in? It's a big difference.
And I'm sure that there were a lot of dealers that didn't like this idea. If you think about it, you have dealers that have been selling motorcycles for and getting a profit of anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 per motorcycle when they sell it, right? And then they've got a lot of service opportunity after that on that motorcycle. And then you come in with this bicycle that sells for $5,000. I don't know, the profit margin on that for the dealer, maybe it's $1,000, right? And there's not really going to be any service on it because it's electric. The only thing you can do is maybe sell replacement batteries or if a charger goes bad. So the service business isn't there. So for the dealer, this is a hard transition to make. But the point, as you said, Manny, is what's that dealer going to do anyway? They're just going to go out of business because the motorcycle sales are on their way down. The demographics are fighting against them. So they're not in a good situation as it is. And it's time to start thinking about what that next wave is going to be. And often we have to push our distribution in that direction. The distribution, well, they're set in their ways, as you said, nostalgic for the way business has been. And we have to get them to go in a new direction. And that leads me, in the field of transportation, to the biggest disruptor that I know, and that's Jeff Bezos, who announced recently that he's going to be on the very first flight that his company is going to make into outer space. And he's going to take his brother along on the flight with him. And they're selling off the third seat in an auction. And that auction isn't complete yet. It's going to be completed on Saturday. But as of Tuesday, the bid's $3.5 million for somebody to ride with him. And now we have to start thinking about what's the future of air travel, right? What's going to happen in with the advent of these companies? Elon Musk's got his company, Jeff Bezos has his company, and Richard Branson has his company. All of them working on space flight, pushing rockets into outer space. It's been a freight business up till now, mostly getting satellites up in there and doing some testing. But now we're talking about moving people around. And United announced this week that they placed an order with a company out of Colorado for a new supersonic transport plane. We haven't had supersonic planes ever since Air France put the Concorde out of business a decade ago. Now they're talking about bringing it back, and it should be in the market by 2029. That means you could get on a plane in Phoenix, and if the range is still there, I'm not sure if it is, but if the range is there, you'd be in London about the time you took off, right? You'd make that whole flight in short enough time that you'd cover up the entire time zone. So if you took off at 6, you'd land at about 6. So the supersonic travel's coming back. The Defense Department has put out a contract for people to start developing the systems to do supersonic space-based air freight, so that you could take and put something on one of these Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos rockets and send it into outer space to have it come down on the other end. So say perhaps you took off in Japan and came down in Amsterdam. You could actually do that, go around the world in a very, very short period of time. Are there things that in the medical industry or electronics Where would you find that kind of, there'd be value for that? Obviously, the Defense Department wants to make sure it's ahead of the game, but they're already planning on it. Supersonic air freight transport.
People need to look ahead. The future is here, quote unquote. The Jetsons are here. We're here now. And we're really, if you're smart about it, you're going to be able to shift your business in that direction rather than fight it.
Well, you said the Jetsons, and that is the magic word, because now we have drones. And so drones we often think of as the small planes that we'll see. Often they're doing some kind of video work, perhaps videotaping a house for a real estate agent, or videotaping an area of land for agriculture or development purposes. But drones are much bigger than that. There are now drones that can carry 4 people. And so these, they're vertical takeoff and landing, VTOL it's called. So they, straight up like a helicopter, then fly and then land like a helicopter. Powered electrically. They don't need to have fuel, right? So they match up with the trend towards sustainability. And they can carry, there are now at least 6 companies out there that have drones of this size big enough they can carry 4 to 5 people. And so the question becomes, is that really a Jetson world now? Now where you can have a drone that you could program into the computer, it goes into the FAA system, says it's going to pick me up out of my yard and take me from Las Vegas to Reno, right? And I just sit back and relax in the comfort of my own private electric-powered plane that would make that hop for me without me even having to be on the ground. That, again, the technology's not only here, the prototypes are here. We're already seeing these things in existence. Boeing has got a subsidiary company that's making these kinds of drone planes today. So you're going to have this future very shortly. We're talking by 2019 for supersonic air transport for United Airlines. So we're talking about Jeff Bezos going into space this month. We're talking about drones that can carry people that already exist. They can carry equipment into any place that you want to go. This stuff exists. Have you figured out how you're going to put it in your business? Have you thought about how this stuff is going to affect the needs that you have for moving your products? How will it affect your supply chain?
Yes.
How will it affect your customers? How will they behave? If I can get a vertical takeoff and landing drone-based plane,
yes.
When do I want a car now?
Yeah, of course.
Wouldn't it be
so
better?
So this is where I'll invite our listeners and our watchers to send me an email, Manny@sparkpartners.com, and I will send you, we have a list of 60 trends. There's obviously there's many more, but 60 major trends that are happening right now in the world. And you can take a look at these trends and see how they compare to your business.
I think people out there, what we're trying to drive home in this particular episode is the notion that when you look at things that are happening in the world, are you thinking about what the conclusions might be? Where will this lead? How will the dominoes fall down? How will it affect your supply chain? How will it affect your consumers? How will it affect your business? It was 20 years ago, we didn't all have a cell phone running around. We certainly 20 years ago weren't running around with apps on our phone that could do things that we almost had to have a desktop computer to do 20 years ago, right? We didn't, but you could see it coming. Once the mobile phone went from analog to digital, once we started seeing we had more capability, once the zone mesh was being created, we could start to really see the power that was going to come from this. And you saw Apple, which was the Mac company, make this big decision at the turn of the century to commit itself to mobility. And by committing itself to mobility, it went from really bankruptcy. It had 45 days cash to the most valuable company on the planet, right? Well, maybe Aramco, Saudi Aramco might be more valuable. But otherwise, it's number 1 or it's number 2. And it pulled that off in just 10 years, right? Once it made that commitment and moved forward, and it became the first company to ever be worth $1 trillion. So from bankruptcy to $1 trillion of valuation in 15 years. Why? By building on trends. By understanding how the trend was developing and then getting products that build on that trend. And that's what I think we're trying to encourage our listeners here to understand. They should be looking at these trends in demographics, looking at these trends in technology, in transportation, and electronics, and the ability to have unmanned transportation, drones, and say, this is going to be the world. And when it is the world, how can you use that to be more successful? And you need to think about that. You need to plan for that future, not plan from your old past.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of a little funny story here that I'll share with you regarding my son, my 13-year-old son. So we sat down and watched a movie the other day, fired up the TV, and it said there was a problem with the internet connection. And so it kind of led us down a menu, and one of the first things it said is it a wireless or is it wired configuration? And ours happens to be wireless, but my son asked me, he says, what does wired mean? And I explained to him that some instances you actually plug into the router with an Ethernet cable, and I sort of began to describe the whole process of how we got to wireless. But in his 13-year-old mind, he didn't know that in the day that you had to connect your TV with the actual cable, with a wire. And so I'm also thinking about, some of these people that are over 100 and plus years old. There's a woman who's 117 years old. So think about how much she's seen since her birth. I mean, the advent of the proliferation of the vehicle, the air travel, and the television and radio, and I mean certainly the internet, all these other things. In just 100 years, this whole world has really turned in a completely new direction.
And the thing here again is it's going to keep going that way. And we're going to keep aging. The population is. We're going to have more senior citizens. We're going to have fewer young people. We're going to have fewer babies. What does that do for your business? Are you going to help people that are 70, 80 years old have productive lives? Because, it's not like people at 70 these days aren't out doing things. They're out bicycling, hiking. They're working. They're getting jobs at Amazon. They're getting jobs in fast food, right? They're actually looking for work. They're not trying to retire the way we used to think about it many years ago. And so how are you building for that demographic? Can you use some of these technologies we're talking about to make everybody's life more satisfying, the senior citizens as well as their children, as well as their grandchildren? How would this come together? What kind of beautiful future world scenario can you create? And then how can you make it happen? What is the solution you can provide to make these to go with these trends, these demographic trends, these technology trends, and help fulfill the vision for those so that you could try to be the next Apple if you wanted to?
Yeah, precisely. And that's a really good segue to talk about our course, Think Innovation, which is, of course, a course on business growth and teaches you how to align your business with these trends, look outward, and really plan for a future which is already in process. And so go to our website, sparkpartners.com. We're also having an event on June 24th where we will be taking some Q&A from our listeners. It's your opportunity to be able to speak with Spark Partners and talk to us about your business. Give us some ideas and let us help you to see a future with your company at the forefront of it. Rather than being a reactionary company, you're going to be one that is assertive and is ahead of the curve. So with that, I'm going to log off on your final thoughts here, Adam. And with that, we'll talk to you later.
I encourage everybody to get outside of their box, then think. Enjoy the course.
Thanks. Take care.